Well, as you know, this week the U.S. Supreme Court has been hearing oral arguments in a couple of state laws that protect girls and women's sports. We certainly have that issue in West Virginia, and West Virginia is one of the states they're arguing in front of the justices. Our Attorney General J.B. McCuskey is there. Of course, we have lawyers from the Trump administration and the DOJ there as well, arguing for the protection of women's and girls' athletics. We have a former college athlete. My guest, Alleigh Marré, played basketball and ran cross country at Emerson College, and she's also a mother of two daughters who may later on play sports, and she's wanting to make sure that these laws are in place to protect her daughters and everybody else's daughters who are playing in high school, college, middle school athletics. Alleigh, thank you for joining me today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And you're with an organization called American Parents Coalition. AmericanParentsCoalition.org is a website if folks want to check that out. But tell us a little bit about that organization.
Yeah, so our organization, first and foremost, we're interested in protecting and preserving parental rights. And then there's, of course, so much that falls under that. There's, curriculum in school, the way that affects our kids. There's parental controls and what's going on digital media and how kids interact with screens, the way that screens are used in school. Of course, we have this sports issue, bathrooms, we have what's on TV just writ large and what our kids have access to. So it touches a lot of different spheres of your everyday life. But our main goal is within that world, how is that affecting the parent-child relationship? And we really aim to make sure that nothing can come between that parent and child relationship and giving parents the tools to be able to protect that.
Kind of radical thinking. I mean, that parents would be the ones deciding things about their children, their health, their education, and things like that. I mean, where do you get this kind of crazy stuff from, Alleigh?
I know it's wild. Things that seemed pretty cut and dry a generation ago, we're now having to hold on to by the skin of our teeth. And I think it says a lot, unfortunately, about where the world stands today. But I'm grateful that we are not alone in this fight. There are a lot of really good organizations. We kind of cover those broad swaths, but then there's, of course, great organizations that are very pinpoint in on each of those things that really have it down to a T. And we have a lot of really good partners who are doing a lot of work on this. So slowly but surely, we'll chip away at it, and we'll make sure that parents can, in fact, retain those rights and relationships with their kids.
Yeah. So you have a couple of different states that are arguing in front of the Supreme Court justices over this issue of what they call transgender sports, but it's biological boys and men playing with and against girls and women, biological boys going into girls' locker rooms and bathrooms, changing in front of them, watching their teammates change, and it's again, a few years ago, this was common sense. We would never have allowed this. In fact, I believe we would have seen some irate dads.
Yeah.
Yet I'll just say this as an aside. It seems like everybody I talk to on this issue is a concerned mom, and like yourself. I don't know where the men are, but it'd be nice if they would step up too. So one case is involving an Idaho law. And the other one, as I mentioned, is involving a West Virginia law, the Save Our Sports Act. But then after that was passed by the legislature and signed into law by the governor at the time, it has been held up by the circuit court, the Fourth Circuit, and that has allowed a biological male named Becky Pepper Jackson, who is a sophomore this year at Bridgeport High School in Central West Virginia, and he has competed against girls in the high school state track and field meet. And because this young boy was allowed to compete in girls track and field, there were girls who did not make it to the state meet in the categories of disc and shot put. And in fact, Becky Pepper Jackson finished in the top 10 in both of those categories as a freshman. And because this ruling by SCOTUS is not going to come likely until June, the West Virginia State Track and Field Championship will be over and done with. So it's likely that that this young boy will be competing once again against girls and keeping certain girls who've worked very, very hard to be in this position from being able to go to the state track championships. I mean, that's very unfortunate. And this type of thing has happened in states all across the country.
Yeah, I mean, what you touch on is just the basic level of fairness. But one thing that I would love to draw attention to, and I think it was Jennifer Say who tweeted something like this the other day, but was just so spot on for those of us who are or were athletes or who have kids who are athletes. This isn't just about participation. Like, I don't want to participate. Like, I'm not doing this to just be on the team. You're doing it because you want to win. Like, it's also about the competition. It's about improving and being better than the girls next to you. It's about the camaraderie that comes from being on a team. All of that is just completely obliterated when you start injecting testosterone and putting a boy on these teams.
Mm.
And so there's the basic issue of fairness, but it's so much bigger than, quote, whining about fairness. There are places for boys and men to participate. Those exist. So you can't even make the argument on the face of discrimination when there is a place for those individuals to play, but it's not on the place that is for women and girls. It's so sad because the women who came a generation or two before me fought so hard for this to even exist. And it really gets under my skin because I'm someone who really benefited from it. You know, I grew up, you mentioned this at the top, playing sports, and I was no phenomenal athlete. I played D3. But the things that I learned from sports, I use every single day in my career, at home. I've got 4 little kids. They get under my skin every single day. And the strength that I have under pressure, my ability to stay calm with that, like, nails on the chalkboard whining that I get from them every day. Like, I wasn't born with that. You get that from catching an elbow in the face and being able to still make a layup. And those are lessons that we are just depriving from the young women and girls who are coming up behind us. And it's why I feel so strongly about preserving these opportunities for the next generation of girls.
Mm. Yeah, and let's talk about that elbow in the face, or maybe a spike volleyball, or something happening on the wrestling mat. We've seen several cases of girls in high school, college, being severely injured because they were competing against someone who was bigger, stronger, faster, a male athlete pretending to be a female. And I mean, there's been, I mean, even President Trump talked about this at the initial State of the Union address about a year ago, that there have been several young women hurt, maybe even permanently disfigured because of this type of thing.
Yeah, there are even, more gruesome examples than that. There was a young woman, I believe it was in Massachusetts, playing field hockey, and she caught a ball to the face and knocked out half her teeth. I mean, it's just, men and women are biologically different in the same way that gravity exists, in the same way that we have all accepted that when you're driving down the street and you see a red light, you stop. There are just certain laws of nature and societally accepted, ways of life that we all live and operate between in order to create this homeostasis and this environment where we can all work together and thrive and have a good community. And when you start ripping these definitions apart and trying to pretend, not just redefine things, but pretend that basic biological differences don't exist, pretend that there aren't these differences in ability and strength, and all of that is just like a non-issue. It's all pretend because of, quote, gender identity. You're really doing a disservice to these girls. Another thing that you touched on that I think is equally important is the issue of safety and privacy when it comes to bathrooms and locker rooms. So right now we're having this conversation in the Supreme Court about Title IX as it applies to sports. But I think the reason that they're so focused on that is because it's one of the few places where that distinction between men and women is so clear. If we lose it in sports, we're going to lose it everywhere else. And that includes bathrooms and locker rooms. We've already seen a lot of this at the YMCA, an organization that gets $600 million a year in federal taxpayer funding. Their policy writ large across their national brand is to let their individual branches decide, based on what the state says. And this was once a Christian organization that now you can go into a locker room and there could be a man standing right there next to your 7-year-old daughter getting ready to get into the swimming pool, changing his clothes completely naked. So you have this erosion, not just of fairness in sports and the protection of opportunities for women in sports, but also just basic safety and privacy, and the ask and the expectation that women are just going to stomach that uncomfortable feeling and turn a blind eye to the fact that they don't feel safe, naked in a locker room. It's disgusting, and it's, quite frankly, I'm really glad that it's in front of the Supreme Court so that hopefully sanity will prevail, and we can put this to bed.
We're talking with Alleigh Marré. She's a mom, a former collegiate athlete herself, a spokesperson with AmericanParentsCoalition.org on this issue of protecting girls in athletics. The Tom Roten Show is brought to you in part by Midland Insurance. Listen, nobody really wants to talk about life insurance, but we all want our loved ones taken care of when we move on. And life's full of surprises, but your family's future should not be one of them. So have that conversation about life insurance with an experienced, trustworthy agent, Dan Kinder of Midland Insurance. That's who I talk to. And you can call or text Dan and tell him Tom sent you at 304-704-4244. He might be able to save you some money on your auto and home insurance as well. Located at 602 Central Avenue, Barboursville, West Virginia, voted best in the tri-state 7 straight years. Call or text Dan for a free quote on home, auto, business, and life insurance. 304-704-4244. Allie, this issue is so controversial, but yet if you use common sense, it really shouldn't be controversial. And it has become a political line in the sand for the Democrat Party, unfortunately. I believe the last poll I saw, it was like 70 to 75% of Americans believe that it's wrong for biological males to play with and against women or girls in sports. And these are people that cross party lines.
Right.
But yet we're seeing people in political positions, elected political positions, that are just holding the line. They're digging in on this issue. Just curious, why do you think that they would take a stand on it this way for something that's really not popular throughout all demographics in America?
Yeah, and to your point, it's not even just America. All of the countries who were the initial early adopters of this, gender identity and the gender science, Norway, Finland, the UK, Sweden, all of those European countries who were the early adopters have now since put out research saying, okay, wait, hang on, pump the brakes. We're not seeing the same long-term effects on kids. Puberty seems to be a natural way for kids to get through this dysphoria. And so you have all of these Western European countries who are stopping these practices. And instead, in the United States, we're doubling down, but also seeing the same science. And so it's really mind-boggling. This personal opinion, but I can't help but think it's not a follow the money scenario. When these, especially when we're talking about children, not grown adults, you're creating a patient for life. So this is someone who at 5, 6, 7 years old, if you're starting them on hormone blockers, on just the gender reassignment therapies that are not even surgical yet. You're starting this in early elementary school. This person is now beholden to the medical complex for the remainder of their lives. That could be anywhere from 20 to 70 years. So now you have someone with ongoing surgeries, hormone replacement therapy forever, and not to mention any other, quote, gender affirming elective surgeries that they choose to have on their body. So I would have to think that that's the motivator,
Mm.
especially when you see big organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics and others agreeing on this. They became quite cozy with Democrats through the COVID lockdowns and all the medical guidance that came through with COVID that has since been debunked or disproven or muddied, if you want to be generous. And so my assumption there is that we have a very similar relationship just beneath the surface, and there's financial stake for them to be carrying the water, because I don't understand how you get organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics to be on board with this when our Western allies and other countries have stepped back, and the science just doesn't bear it out.
Yeah, I believe you're right. I think big pharma and their big money has influenced this issue quite a bit, unfortunately, because there are real people and their lives at stake here. And we talked about the safety, we talked about privacy, we talked about fair competition. But here's something else. um, your daughters growing up, they could work really, really hard, and if this is allowed, if boys are going to be continuing to play in girls athletics, it could cost your daughter a scholarship.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is happening. This is real, because a lot of colleges are looking. Okay, where did you finish in the state? Well, this biological boy, Becky Pepper Jackson, finished eighth in shot put and third in disc. Well, we're going to take that person. We're going to give that person the scholarship. Not to mention the fact that the records are going to be there forever. Unless this is corrected. And then you get into. I mean, if you really want to run this out to the end, Allie, you get one team that's in a conference that starts actively recruiting biological men for their women's team,
Yeah.
and that's going to have to spread to the other teams in that conference
Right.
if they are going to be able to compete. They say, well, how can I compete against team A and team B when they have two or three boys on their basketball team? I better get two or three male athletes pretending to be girls on my team, or I'm not going to be able to compete.
Yeah, you're spot on. We had when I was shortly after college, there was a co-ed league that we played in, and the rule was only that you had to have two girls on the court at all times. You didn't have to have it was not the same. You didn't have to have three boys on the court at the same time. So thinking we were clever, we put together a team of all girls just to, poke a hole in that. And I was the only Division III girl. Everyone else was a D1 girl. And the men in this league were not college athletes. They were regular old athletes. And we got crushed most of the time. We got enough wins to prove a point about the rule and to kind of, have a nice running joke with the folks in the league. But they crushed us. And it was genetics and biology. They were so much bigger and faster than stronger than us, even all as washed up former college athletes. And that exists forever and will exist forever. But the thing that I think is equally important, we spend a lot of time, rightfully so, on the girls who lose scholarships and podium places, and we should. But what's equally important is the girls on the cusp who get cut to make places for those boys. These are the girls who probably stand to benefit the most from learning discipline and how their body responds to exercise and what they eat, who could really use the mentorship from a coach. Maybe their family life isn't great. They get cut from the team. Now they have no adult mentors. The camaraderie that comes from being on a team, learning how to get along with others. All these girls on the cusp, there really is that true ripple effect of girls across the spectrum, from the most talented athletes to the bench warmers, who really suffer from these rules and these laws in place that allow for men to compete in women's sports. And I really hope that we're able with this ruling, likely in June, to be able to put this to bed and secure those opportunities for the next generation of girls.
Yeah. What do you make of it when you hear now Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who said in her confirmation hearing that she couldn't define what a woman was? We've heard in these oral arguments this week, I believe it was an ACLU lawyer arguing in favor of the transgender movement, that they couldn't define what a woman was. I mean, it's just, I mean, we've lost all common sense here and biological science, in fact. How is it that we have people in those positions that can't even admit what a woman is?
I don't know. But honestly, I'm glad that we do, because I think it really allows common sense and reality to prevail, because like you're saying, it really draws just a spotlight to the fact that this is lunacy, that this common biological understanding by anyone with a pulse is not able to be articulated by people who are supposed to hold these really prestigious and academic and intelligent positions. And so when you have someone in that position who either can't understand or can't explain this basic biological reality, I think it makes the argument that much cleaner. I believe it was Alito who said, in response to this exchange that you're referring to, something along the lines of, well, if you can't define what sex is, how can I rule or determine that discrimination occurred? Discrimination against who? Discrimination against what? And I
Mm,
think the ACLU is actually on pretty shaky ground here, because if they remove the definition, if they somehow win this and remove the defining characteristics of sex, it's not going to be long before they try and do the same thing with race. And then there will be no longer an existence of any form of protections for anybody on the basis of discrimination. Um, and so that's I hate to use the term slippery slope, because I know it just kind of like turns people off one way or the other, but it is. If you start removing these differentiating factors between people, then there are no protections either. So it's very much a double-edged sword. And to get back to your initial question, I'm glad they're in those positions, because I think it makes it quite clear that this is just a complete nonsense argument. And hopefully we're able to put it to bed.
mm. A lot of great information. Again, the website is AmericanParentsCoalition.org. And Allie was talking about the YMCA and their discriminatory practices there. You actually have some information about that, I see, on that website. So, and this isn't the only issue that the American Parents Coalition is standing for, girls protecting girls' sports. As you mentioned, there's several other issues. It's basically about parents having the right to make the decision for their children, parental rights and parental consent as well, right?
Yeah, there's in this same vein, there are a ton of public schools across the country who have policies in place where, should your child decide that they want to go by a different name, pronouns, change their gender, that schools don't even have to notify parents, let alone get their consent to be calling the child by this different name. We've seen a lot of examples in medical practices where, when the doctor asks the parent to leave the room to have a one-on-one conversation, they're asking about gender and identity and pronouns, things like that. But then also on a completely different topic, access to social media and accounts and ads that are being served, the algorithms. We've done a lot in the world of TikTok and requesting full divestiture of China. There's, of course, all the national security concerns, but what China is doing with that data of your children, the way that they're able to, their algorithm works to be able to feed eating disorder and self-harm content to kids. We have a lot of information about that on our website. So yeah, we are laser focused on women's sports and gender, the way that that's affecting the parent-child relationship, but a lot of other issues as well, especially in the screen and the digital world.
Hmm. All right, Alleigh Marré, Executive Director of the American Parents Coalition. Again, AmericanParentsCoalition.org. Great information. Appreciate you standing up for girls' sports and standing for the truth. Alleigh, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.